The Aztec gods, because history nerds. Have you ever wondered how powerful the Aztec gods are? And can the Mexican gods of old defeat the current god of Mexico, Son Goku? Now, according to my script here, I need to make a couple of disclaimers before I start, but guess what? That's too long. I'll leave all my dumb disclaimers in the description. Not like anyone cares anyways. Let's just start already. First, story time. In the beginning, there was only a couple, husband and wife. Their names changed depending on the source, but for this video, I have decided to go with Quetzalcoatl for the husband and Tezcatlipocas for the wife. This couple one day, for no apparent reason, decides to have children, and they first create 4 gods: xipe, totec, Huitzilopochtli, Tezcatlipoca, and Quetzalcoatl. After these 4 children are born, Itzpapalotl and her husband then create the Mimixcoa, the 400 brothers. Once all the gods have been born, Quetzalcoatl and Huitzilopochtli are tasked with making the rest of creation. Quetzalcoatl then by himself creates the Omeyocan. This is the Aztec heaven. It is comprised of 13 layers. The highest layer is called Tamoanchan, and that is where Itzpapalotl and her husband live. The rest of the gods, by the way, can only go as high as the 8th layer. With heaven made, Quetzalcoatl and Huitzilopochtli create the primeval waters, and in them they spawn a giant crocodile monster called Xipe. It is from this creature that the earth is then formed, and once the earth is made, Quetzalcoatl creates Mictlan, which is the Aztec underworld, and it is comprised of 9 layers. Once all of this has been made, there is only one thing left: to make the sun. The problem is that both Quetzalcoatl and his brother xipe totec have both decided that they should become the sun, and so a battle of the gods begins. Every time one of them rises into the sky to become the sun, the other one knocks him out of the sky, and every time this happens, it is considered a new cycle. After 4 cycles, the rest of the Aztec gods decide that this is stupid, and instead they are going to elect who becomes the sun by voting. Now, there are some shenanigans in this part of the story too, but I do want to get to the power levels, so skipping a bunch of stuff, the one who ends up becoming the sun is Huitzilopochtli. As the sun, Huitzilopochtli ascends above Tamoanchan, and then he just stays there without moving. Quetzalcoatl then tries to hit him with some spears so that he gets moving, but Huitzilopochtli is so high that the attacks cannot reach him. Huitzilopochtli then explains that the reason why he's not moving is because he does not have enough energy to move. And so, almost all of the Aztec gods decide to sacrifice themselves to empower Huitzilopochtli. The only ones who remain alive are Itzpapalotl, Tezcatlipoca, Quetzalcoatl, and xipe totec. Every other god is now one with Huitzilopochtli, but turns out that even this is not enough, and Quetzalcoatl has to blow some air to give Huitzilopochtli the last push he needs, and then Huitzilopochtli finally starts moving. Once creation has been established, Quetzalcoatl and xipe totec descend to earth and create 2 tribes of humans. Then one day Itzpapalotl descends to earth in the form of a 2-headed deer. Xipe totec then finds her and captures her. It is said that by physically being in contact with the deer, xipe totec was invincible. The followers of xipe totec then desire the deer and declare war against their own maker. During this conflict, the deer, aka Itzpapalotl, she kills xipe totec and eats his heart, but then she also dies. With her death, Huitzilopochtli descends to earth, kills the followers of xipe totec and eats their hearts. He also eats the heart of Itzpapalotl, and by eating their hearts, he gains their power, and after Itzpapalotl dies, Quetzalcoatl creates time. Fast forward 52 years later, and Quetzalcoatl and his followers have been living all this time in a city called Tolan, which is basically a paradise. But turns out that spending all this time on earth has turned Quetzalcoatl into a bit of a softie. He has grown too fond of humanity and told his followers to not perform any human sacrifices for the gods and sacrifice animals instead. Tezcatlipoca eventually has enough of this and comes to earth to get rid of Quetzalcoatl, and the way he does that is by getting Quetzalcoatl drunk. Once inebriated, Quetzalcoatl calls his sister, and the 2 of them get even more wasted. And then Quetzalcoatl does something bad. Once Quetzalcoatl sobers up and discovers what he has done, he gets so embarrassed, he leaves Tolan and goes to a place called Tlapalan. Once there, he burns himself. Then he ascends into space and becomes a star. Well, actually he becomes the planet Venus, but the Aztecs thought that Venus was a star. Now, no doubt you are probably wondering, what did Quetzalcoatl do? Online, other people and other websites will tell you that what Quetzalcoatl did was sleeping with his sister. That certainly makes sense, but in all my reading for this video, I could not find a single line of text from a valid source that confirms this. So because I don't have proof for it, I cannot claim it. With the death of Quetzalcoatl, it is then prophesied that one day, the 5th cycle, the one we are currently in, this cycle will end. It will end with famines and earthquakes, and then Quetzalcoatl is expected to return. His advent will presumably usher a 6th and final cycle, in which the entire world will become a second Tolan, and we will live in paradise forever. And that's it. That's our story. Now let's talk power levels. First, let's cover the one power they all share. All Aztec gods have the ability to change others or themselves into anything they want. But this is the only ability they all share. The Aztec gods are lacking in the hacks department. Alright, now let's get specific. We are only going to power scale Huitzilopochtli, Tezcatlipoca, and Quetzalcoatl, and we're going to start with Huitzilopochtli first. So, Huitzilopochtli was born from a ball of feathers. Its papalotl finds the ball of feathers one day, she then puts it inside of her belly, and that's how Huitzilopochtli is born. It is said that he was born fully armed for combat, but he was born as a skeleton. According to legend, it took him 600 years to grow his skin. Huitzilopochtli was considered the youngest and weakest of the gods. Weakest before he became the sun, that is. But even when he was supposedly weak, he was still helping Quetzalcoatl create the primeval waters, the monster xipe, and he created the concept of war. And that's when he's supposedly weak. He then becomes the sun, which makes him minimum star level, but perhaps more powerful because as the sun, his light illuminates the entirety of Aztec creation, and that is before he absorbs the other Aztec gods. Once he does that, Huitzilopochtli should be ridiculous. The mimic Skoa alone, at the lowest interpretation, should be 400 stars. So Huitzilopochtli minimum should be 400 times more powerful than the sun. But each of the 400 brothers was definitely more powerful than a regular star, because at the same time Huitzilopochtli became the sun, another god became the moon, and originally the moon was as bright as the sun. So one of the 400 brothers, a god called Papastak, he grabs a rabbit and whacks the moon with it, and that makes the moon less bright. Papastak is reducing the power of the moon significantly, and Papastak is not special. He is just one of the 400 brothers, and all of the 400 brothers are one with Huitzilopochtli. But what's even more important than the 400 brothers, Huitzilopochtli has inside of him the powers of both Itzpapalotl and Huehueteotl. We are talking about the two gods that had enough power to create every other Aztec god, including the mimic Skoa, the 400 brothers. So really, saying Huitzilopochtli's power is only 400 times that of a star is actually a hilarious downplay. Keep in mind, Itzpapalotl was so powerful that just being physically close to her was enough to supposedly make you invincible, and that is the kind of power that is inside of Huitzilopochtli now. And while the invincibility thing could be dismissed as an exaggeration, it is kinda supported by the fact that it is said no one can rival Huitzilopochtli in combat. As for equipment, Huitzilopochtli was born with two weapons. First, a type of shield called a chimali. Huitzilopochtli's chimali was called tehuehueli. The shield is not said to have any supernatural abilities, but it is said he shakes the planet when he puts it on. Then again, he can shake the planet when he's doing other things, so the planet quaking power does not come from the shield. His second weapon you will find more interesting. It was a device called an atlatl. An atlatl is like a stick that helps you throw spears better. Huitzilopochtli's atlatl was called Xiuquatl. It was said to be blue in color and it could transform into a fire serpent. Now, in some versions of the story, instead of killing the followers of xipe totec, Huitzilopochtli instead kills the mimic Skoa, the 400 brothers, which means that his weapon is capable of effortlessly one-shotting star-level beings. Another lesser but still impressive feat is the fact that Huitzilopochtli temporarily petrifies Quetzalcoatl. Now some minor trivia and we're done with him. The sun you see in the sky today was believed to not actually be Huitzilopochtli, but instead a reflection of the god. It was believed Huitzilopochtli was the one who invented bows and arrows, and he was supposed to be left-handed. And that's it for Huitzilopochtli. Now let's move on to Tezcatlipoca. Right off the bat, Tezcatlipoca was said to be more powerful than his brothers xipe totec, Quetzalcoatl, and Huitzilopochtli. Tezcatlipoca was believed to be invisible, untouchable, all-knowing, and omnipresent. Because of this, the Aztecs gave him the title Tloque Nahuaque, which gets translated as the ever-present and ever-near. In addition, he is said to be the most powerful god, period. He was so strong, he could make Huitzilopochtli dance on his hand. It was also believed that Tezcatlipoca was the true source of everything, both the good and the bad things. And he was said to be the heart of heaven, or to rephrase, the heart of the sky. So great was his power that the Aztecs gave him the title Moyocoya, which means self-maker. And he was given this title because allegedly he could do anything. He was omnipotent. Lastly, for Tezcatlipoca, he has killed that supposedly infinite amount of human beings twice, and it is said he can hold the planet on his arms. Now let's move on to the next and last god for this video. Let's finally talk about Quetzalcoatl. Let me start with this. I may have saved him for last, but not because he's the strongest. Both Huitzilopochtli and Tezcatlipoca are more powerful than Quetzalcoatl. I left Quetzalcoatl last simply because he's the most popular. However, unlike with Kukulkan, this time I do have some juicy stuff for you. First of all, Quetzalcoatl created time, so one could argue he has time powers. More impressive than this, Quetzalcoatl has enough power to make some crazy things. Consider the 13 layers of heaven, the 9 layers of the underworld, and better yet, the monster Cipacli. Making this creature is impressive because it was Quetzalcoatl along with his 3 other brothers who transformed Cipacli into the earth. That could mean that Cipacli was so powerful, someone like Tezcatlipoca had to intervene. And Cipacli was created by Huitzilopochtli when he was at his weakest and Quetzalcoatl. So one could argue 50% of the energy required to create Cipacli should come from Quetzalcoatl. In addition, Quetzalcoatl was said to be the wind itself. He existed anywhere where there was wind, which gives him a pseudo-omnipresence. Furthermore, Quetzalcoatl is capable of quickly reaching any place regardless of distance. But by far his best feat has to be the killing of the 400 brothers. See, the 400 brothers always die, and their power is always given to Huitzilopochtli, but exactly who kills them changes depending on the source. In some sources, it is Quetzalcoatl, and if we give this feat to him, his power level increases significantly, because the Mimixcoa minimum are 400 stars, but they can also be an infinite amount. And in some versions of the story, the Mimixcoa run away, and the god who kills them has to chase after them, which means that at a high end for this feat, Quetzalcoatl is chasing and successfully killing an infinite amount of star level beings. And you can certainly go even crazier with the wank. The killing of the 400 brothers is a very powerful feat, but to every coin there are 2 sides, and in some versions of the story, once the gods have decided that they have to die for Huitzilopochtli, they all willingly gather together in a place called Teotihuacan, and there they let themselves be killed. That significantly reduces the power level of this feat. Now for other minor things he has done, Quetzalcoatl once lifted the sky. You can take this to mean the literal sky, or the universe, or even all of heaven. However, no matter your interpretation, Quetzalcoatl definitively does not have infinite strength. I say this because he failed to lift Food Mountain. What is that? It was a mountain that had all the food inside of it. How heavy that makes it? Doesn't matter. Quetzalcoatl failed to lift Food Mountain. Therefore, his strength has a limit. But make no mistake, he is definitely not a weakling. Remember, we are talking about a being that can blow some air and push the sun. Speaking of the sun, one could argue that Quetzalcoatl is star level because he became planet Venus, which the Aztecs thought was a star. Quetzalcoatl also can manipulate the weather, make fire rain from the sky, control animals, and allegedly he can craft anything. And lastly, for equipment, Quetzalcoatl has a shield and his own atlatl, but neither of these 2 weapons are said to have any special abilities, and they are also not given names. Alright, that does it for his powers. Now let's quickly go over his physical appearance. So, is Quetzalcoatl a giant serpent with wings? No. Quetzalcoatl was humanoid in form. He was born when its papalotl swallowed a piece of jade, and because of that, his body was made of jade and green in color. His 2 most distinct characteristics were a very long beard, and also he was ugly as sin. In fact, he was so ugly, Tezcatlipoca invented mirrors so that Quetzalcoatl could see how ugly he was. When he was on Earth, Quetzalcoatl used to spend as much time as he could inside his temple so that people could not see him, until someone made a serpent-looking mask for him. And so, whenever Quetzalcoatl went outside, he wore this mask. And that's it, we are done. So, in conclusion, how powerful are the Aztec gods? Easily star level, but the ceiling is much higher than that. Their only downside is that although they have a lot of raw power, they don't have any wacky abilities. They just have a really big number. And with that said, that's another Pantheon cover. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Take care.